It's prime time! Hello, everybody. I am KenMeisterLP, and after the conclusion of the events of Metroid Fusion, we are here with the next game in our Metroid series retrospective, which is the critically acclaimed Metroid Prime of Fame on the Nintendo GameCube. I've been looking forward to this one for quite some time after getting through the first four Metroid titles, and rightfully so. This is the best-selling game of the entire series, selling even more than Super Metroid, which came before. And this definitely hit the peak of the Metroid Golden Age, or at least kickstarted it for me anyway. Um, yeah, Super Metroid was definitely a well-received game, but it was Metroid Prime that turned the series into a blockbuster hit for sure. I can tell you a lot of people who've probably never even heard of Super Metroid, but then you bring up Metroid Prime and they're like, "Oh yeah, I grew up playing that game as a kid." And yeah, because this game kind of came around within my time of childhood, me being 25 years old and all. Um, my experiences with it first coming into the game were a bit iffy, to say the least, but I've come to grow and appreciate this game for what it is. Um, I love this game a lot. I think it definitely deserves a lot of the reception it gets. It's kind of the same perspective I have on, Super Metroid, actually. It's definitely one of my favorites in the series for certain, but it's not my absolute favorite. You know what I'm saying? But all in all, I am so looking forward to this playthrough, and we'll see what comes out of it. So, as you guys may know, this was not developed in-house by Nintendo, but rather by a company by the name of Retro Studios. Retro Studios was a Texas-based game studio who didn't really have much success in the early run. They had a lot of canceled projects, and Nintendo trying to look for a method of booting Samus into the 3D realm at the time, because that was just kind of the big movement at that time period. You wouldn't really know unless you were there. But yeah, basically, um, yeah, this was the game that put Retro Studios on the map for not only, their expertise in Metroid games, but also the Donkey Kong Country Returns line of games. But yeah. Um, we're gonna be starting this game off on hard mode. Hard mode really doesn't do a whole lot. Basically, all it really is that it makes enemies a lot beefier than usual, and you take more damage than usual off of enemy hits. It's really artificial difficulty at its finest, but this is how I play the game anyway, so I don't give a fuck. And that's how I'm going to be playing Metroid Prime 2 as well, so yeah, I'm going to show you guys just how a quote-unquote professional goes through this game, except maybe not really. I don't know. This was a bitch to prepare for, man. I'm glad I'm finally coming to this now, because I before when I finished Super Metroid, I was pretty much dead set on getting ready for the next few games, because that was when the series had hit its big time and the games had become substantially longer. So, in turn, that also means I have to do more preparation and busy work, um, in turn, to get ready for Metroid Prime. So, I actually went and played through the entirety of Metroid Prime, front and back, twice, 100% at all, before coming and doing this Let's Play. And I'm hoping that pays off right here and now, because if it doesn't, oh boy. So, this will be a 100% playthrough. Um, this will not only involve expansions, but this will also involve all of the logbook entries. So if you don't like me having the scan visor out for 75% of the game, then you might want to go and watch somebody else's playthrough of this, because I'm going to go for maximum completion if I can. That is easier said than done. It really wasn't until last year, actually, that I finally got literally everything. and man, was it a hassle. Oh boy, and I don't usually 100% most modern games too, so hearing that coming from me, that's a true testament of, like, devotion there, I suppose. And man, despite this game going for a more realistic aesthetic, which, you know, for most games at the time didn't really age as well, Metroid Prime still looks remarkably good. I'm kind of surprised at how well it held up over the time and years, you know? I guess that kind of goes in part with the fact that, you know, Samus uses a more metallic looking armor as opposed to, like, having to worry about, you know, modeling her entire human infrastructure, I suppose. But man, this game still looks pretty darn good, realistic art style and all, and that really just goes to show just how much of a testament of devotion, like, Retro Studios really, you know, put into making this game to make sure it looked good for years to come. So, I'm going to be playing the GameCube version of this game. I was originally going to be using the Trilogy version, actually, but if you watch my Metroid Fusion Let's Play, and I highly suggest you do, basically what had happened is that Elgato was giving me a lot of shit, and I kept having frame skips all over the goddamn place. So, because of that, I just wanted to kind of go down to basics. I kind of want to show off Metroid Prime, how it was originally played at the time. And plus, this is the version I'm most familiar with anyway. I didn't even get a hold of Metroid Prime Trilogy until, like, last year anyway. So most of the time I spent growing up on the Prime games was me getting them at the time of release. Which I know sounds pretty crazy. But hey, there were people that grew up on this game series after all, and I don't regret that whatsoever. So, on the topic of 100% and scan logs, basically this thing here is the scan visor, and I love the addition of the scan visor so much. Some people kind of feel a bit miffed about it and feel as if it's just kind of an arbitrary tool for progression, but I think it's actually a really cool and nifty little tool that not only lets you find out more about your surroundings, but it also kind of gives details and weird, you know, like, specks of, like, just things that have happened around the environment, like this thing, for example. Like, what the fuck's going on here? And it really makes the world, even though it is desolate and abandoned like it is in every other Metroid game, it really just makes the world just come alive, and it feels like everything's just part of its own little ecosystem. You get to learn everything down from, like, the enemy's behavior, their habitat, their patterns. I love this kind of stuff, man. Anything that gives me an excuse to be invested in the world of the video game I'm playing in, it really just goes to show just how well put together, like, these worlds are within these games. And despite the story of the overall game being more self-contained than anything, it really makes the story just feel that much more important, I feel like. But yeah, this is Samus's first foray into 3D, and I won't lie, the 3D first-person shooter aspect kind of drove me away for a very long time as a kid. Like, I was kind of like, when I was really young, I was like the kind of kid who was completely against first-person shooters, mostly because I sucked ass at them. Like, you can talk to my cousin and just, he can tell you all of the negative experiences I had just getting my ass kicked left and right in Halo. But, yeah, it was the first-person aspect of, you know, Metroid Prime that drove me away at first. And really, despite all of this, though, despite all of this, I kind of wanted more Metroid after finishing up Fusion. So, at the time, I went and rented Metroid Prime back in 2002. But I didn't really come to own the game until, like, sometime around 2005 or so, after I had already played Prime 2. Which might actually be the reason why I have more memories with Prime 2, personally. But, like, yeah, it was a game that I just kind of got my ass kicked left and right in. But as you can see right now, the controls feel very different compared to most other shooters of its time. Instead of using the C stick to aim and navigate, all of your movement is done through the analog stick. And I know this is kind of a weapons slash control scheme that is kind of frowned upon today. I mean, because most people will kind of like directly refer to it as sloppy tank-like movement. But I think it's just like one of those things that I can understand why people dislike, but it's just something that I've kind of grown to be accustomed to, if that makes any sense. So, in a way, like, yeah, I understand the motion control settings that were added into Prime Trilogy were definitely on a scale of being objectively better than their GameCube counterparts. I'm just personally more comfortable with the GameCube controls because that's just how I've played these games. And plus, since you don't really see this kind of control scheme in any other first-person shooter anyway, I guess that was just all the more reason for me to not click with most other shooters in general. So, like, yeah, it's games like this and, like, Uncharted that happen to be one of the only, like, first-person shooter games I could ever, like, truly invest myself into playing. Usually for different reasons or another, whereas with Prime, it's usually about the exploration and the atmosphere, and the fact that you can actually lock onto shit, a la 3D Zelda style-ish. Kind of, sort of. I don't even think that was grammatically correct. I've been doing that a lot lately, oh my god. I've just been, like, cooking up words on the whim for some reason. And I remember going back and watching my Metroid Fusion Let's Play, and I came up with this, like, adjective or adverb called exploratole. And I was like, wait a second, is that even a word? And then I went back and tried to look it up online, and I was like, wait, no, I guess that's not grammatically correct, but it sure is in my terms, I guess. So, not only are we figuring out about the environment and stuff, you can also scan all sorts of computers and lost relics for information on the background of events that have transpired before the events of the game. And I think this is really cool. Like, even though on the surface level the story is pretty simple, Samus finds a derelict space station out in orbit somewhere, and something kind of looks off, and then we have to go and pursue whatever the space pirates are after. Like, all surface level shit. But what really feels engaging is how all of these events transpire and lead into each other, and how they're able to, like, do all of this, you know? So this right here is basically confirming that this game was, at the time, before Sakamoto started being a bitch and claiming the series as non-canon, this happens after the events of Metroid 1. Not Super Metroid, Metroid 1. The Metroid Prime trilogy actually takes place in between the events of Metroid Prime, or Metroids 1 and 2. What am I saying? Yeah. So, but at the same time, despite the fact that it definitely doesn't feel like the events that transpire in these games don't have as much of a direct, like, influence on the timeline that you'd think, the self-contained stories within that all kind of interconnect with each other, all the more makes it more worth it, I feel. Especially when you figure out what kind of threat we're up against in this game, because there's one central, like, plot MacGuffin thing that we'll be running into later that plays a huge central part in, like, all of the shit that goes down in this line of games, basically. These line of games, rather. So, we're here in Frigate Orpheon, and this place kind of looks a bit run down. It's definitely, you know, evident that there was some kind of activity going on here with the space pirates and whatever they found. But you can tell that most of the space pirates we have found along the way aren't really in pristine condition to be fighting at their maximum capacity. Why is that exactly? Well, that's why we're here. And you can kind of piece this all together by just looking at the environment. Everything's kind of broken up. There's a lot of failed experiments. You can scan all of these, like, tubes and just see the kind of effects that whatever they're testing has done to these said species or another. They're doing some pretty crazy shit. But yeah, this area is kind of like an extended version of the prologue area of Super Metroid. In fact, Metroid Prime in particular draws a lot of similar story beats and parallels to Super Metroid that we'll be getting into the further we go. But the prologue just happens to be one of those many things. And yeah, aka if you're scanning things right here and now and you're trying to fill up that logbook, better do it right here and now, because one thing I really hate about the logbook in particular, as much as I was praising it earlier, is that if you're wanting to 100% the game, you need to make sure you have a grasp on everything you're scanning, because there may or may not be an instance where you miss out on something and you cannot scan it ever again. And this especially applies to boss monsters. Oi. And that is why I'm always whipping the scan visor out in case of these precautions. Oh boy, and I am just now realizing just how brutal hard mode is just from the few hits I'm taking from these space pirates alone. Oh my goodness. But yeah, Metroid Prime, when I first played it, like, man, I was so lost. I remember, I think I had gotten to a point where I was getting the gravity suit towards the midway point of the game, and I only had like 4 energy tanks and like 45 missiles. Like, I sucked ass at Metroid Prime the first time I played it through. And it really wasn't until I finally owned the game, like 3 or 4 years later, where I finally felt like I could, like, give a damn about what I was doing and understand what the fuck I was doing. And yeah, what the fuck happened here? Death caused by acid burns to the face. So, in case of those curious about how we'll be handling all of the logbook entries, I'm going to be trying to skim through them as much as I can, but with just enough like leeway to where most of the viewers can kind of summarize or read through most of what's happening. Make sure you're not only scanning enemies and environmental pieces, but also things like save stations and pickups and shit. That counts towards logbook completion as well. Just gonna go ahead and throw that out there right now. But goddamn, I lost my train of thought. Fuck, what was I saying? Man, I space out so easily. Anywho, let's go and fight this boss. And yeah, oh man, there's a lot of dead bodies lying about here. What in the world could have caused this? Oh god, that thing is huge! Alright, so this here is our first boss. This here is the Parasite Queen. Pretty simple introductory boss to start off our adventure here. And he's going to teach us all about our strafing mechanics and all of that shit. Strafing is going to be your best friend in boss fights and close quarter combat, simply because it's going to give you more ways of dodging and outmaneuvering your opponent to keep them away from you. Because it's not like Samus can just punch enemies in the face. We're just going to fill this guy's face with blood, pump it all up. And yeah, this is definitely something you don't want to miss out on for logbook entries and shit, so Make sure you don't forget. Not much to really say here. And just like any other Metroid game or Metroid game with a obligatory prologue portion, we've got ourselves an escape sequence, which shouldn't be new to anybody playing a Metroid game in general. But yeah, it really is following the same story beats as Super Metroid when you think about it. But don't worry, we've got ample time to get out of here. 7 minutes, in fact. I actually wonder if, like, they toned down the time limit in hard mode or not. Because I feel like it had to have been 8 minutes in normal. I could be totally wrong, though. So, 7 minutes can only really mean one thing. That one thing being that, well, we're gonna have to go through a lot of spaces here to backtrack through to even get back to our ship. And oh god, what's going on here? Man, they were really going all out here. Like, despite the space station blowing up clearly, like, they're more concerned about getting their test subjects out of here. That really shows you just how devoted the space pirates are to meeting their end goals here. They kind of remind me of, like, Japanese, like, kamikaze soldiers, now that I think about it. Like, they're willing to die first before giving up defeat willingly. Unless that's what they modeled their characteristics after? I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, even though this was an American-developed game, this was still headed by a Japanese studio, so things like the soundtrack and the direction that the game took was all influenced by Japanese folks, so. Oh yeah, did I also say that the soundtrack was pretty fucking awesome? I didn't? Or I did? Who knows? But regardless of the fact, the soundtrack is awesome. So shut the fuck up. It's not my favorite soundtrack in the series, however. That's still like 2 games away. But man, Prime's soundtrack, like, I loved a lot of Super Metroid's pieces, don't get me wrong. It had a lot of good atmospheric pieces. And while Prime definitely has that too, when it comes to having the more engaging action pieces or just getting, you know, pumped up for a battle, I feel like Prime and just the Prime series as a whole does a better job in delivering in that department, I feel. So it's like, if I'm looking for catchy music, sometimes the Prime series can also have that perfect blend of music that just works well together, I find. I'm just burning through these missiles. And just as you guys know, one feature that they brought into the Prime series that isn't present in the 2D games is that you charge your beam. Not only does it deal additional damage like it did beforehand, it also sets up for using your beam as sort of a tractor beam like pickup tool of sorts. And you can use this to draw in pickups and missiles and shit. And I think that's actually pretty clever, considering the fact that a lot of the time, since Samus is way less mobile than she was in the 2D games, you're not always going to be within reach of, like, pickups. So being able to draw them in really, really helps, I find it. Oh my god. Oh yeah. Not only is atmosphere present in these games, but tension and horror is as well. That is most definitely not absent in Prime at all. Not at all. And yeah, now that I think about it, we have come into this adventure pretty beefy, huh? And there's our old friend Ridley. Wouldn't be most Metroid games without him. But yeah, on the topic of weapons, we are pretty decked out for the early game, now that I think about it, which we usually aren't, actually. Like, the last time we were kind of decked out was Metroid 2, where we had the Morph Ball and the Long Beam available, as well as a pair of missiles. But we already had the Vario suit, the charge shot, like the morph ball bombs, grapple beam. We have all sorts of decked out shit, which really tells you just how powerful Samus is and how much of a grasp she has on keeping her equipment intact. Or so we think. Nah. Would it be a Metroid game without stripping you to the bare minimum? Though, I won't lie, at least this game kind of gives you an explanation for it happening, unlike Super, which, again, like, the time period between Metroid 2 and Super isn't that far spread apart. So you come to that game and you're like, where the fuck did all of Samus's arsenal go? And then with this game, it's like, yeah, there's an explanation, but like, if all it takes is an explosion to just knock out over 90% of Samus's arsenal, then that would imply that something like that could happen in any case or given scenario, and that just, I don't know. It's dumb. I think they could have came up with a better excuse, I find. I feel like Metroid Prime 2 and Fusion were the only games to provide any sort of reasonable excuse for why Samus lost all of her starting game equipment, to be honest with you. But, if you want my opinions on those two games, watch Fusion and eventually Prime 2 when I get to that. But yeah. Nah. You didn't honestly think the whole game would take place on this derelict space station, did you? Of course not. This really is following all of the same similar story beats to Super Metroid. Like hell, right down to the whole idea of chasing Ridley down to this abandoned derelict planet. Because Ridley needs to die, god damn it. We don't know what he did exactly, but he needs to fucking die. Because he is bad and we are good. This planet looks pretty tranquil. Man, those leaf textures have not aged too well. God damn. I didn't say all of the graphics in this game aged well. Man, leaves and trees especially, I find, in like the earlier gen games, like with 6th and 7th, 6th generation games in general. Like, I find that it's always the trees and the leaves and the branches that age the worst for some reason. I don't know why. Oi! Man, that was a long first part. I didn't think the prologue would take that long, but here we are. That's the consequence of playing a longer Metroid game, I suppose. So, next time on Let's Play Metroid Prime for the Nintendo GameCube, we're going to explore this new planet and find out where we need to go. So see you guys then.